Hey everybody, this is Talkative Carl back again for another TV show spoiler review, and I'm continuing on with the X-Men 90s show. Now we're on season 2, and we'll be getting right into it. It kind of feeds in perfectly into my Gambit. At least one episode feeds right into my Gambit comic book review that I'll be doing fairly soon after I'm done with this video. But man, I love, because I didn't even, maybe I realized it by just really haven't really put much thought into it, but it was like so clever. All right, let's go it up a bit. I thought it was like, very clever. Kind of like, I gotta imagine the people who worked on Clone Wars really, excuse me, probably took some inspiration from how the X-Men 90 show set up their, episodes with, certain arcs with a few single episode adventures sprinkled throughout. Right as we left off from the previous season, leading into this one, there's a 2-episode arc in season 2 with Scott and Jean getting married. And there's the return of Morph, who thought died in the beginning of season 1. And in case you don't know, Morph has the mutant ability to shapeshift, kind of like Mystique, except he's not constantly blue. But he's gone through some mental trauma himself, and because he got picked up by Mr. Sinister and experimented on, he got a split personality, or DID at this point. So on instructions on Mr. Sinister, he essentially pulled a Baron Zemo, i.e. from MCU, and decided to break the team up from the inside out. So he shapeshifted into his into their priest, essentially ruining the marriage. I won't say ruin the marriage, but just they're not legally married, even though they should be. He also tricks Xavier into thinking like Magneto needs help, and he sends him coordinates for him to like fly away. And for the bulk of this season, Professor X and Magneto are trapped in the Savage Lands with their powers neutralized, but as a side effect, Xavier can actually use his legs again. So they spent the bulk of the time in the Savage Lands fighting off dinosaurs, and even showing their camaraderie and respect they have for each other is really cool. And the fact that you also see that despite not having their powers, especially Magneto, he proves to be still as capable without his powers. But you also learn that Magneto found the Savage Lands long ago, and created some of these mutates. It's hard to just to describe what is like a mutate. I guess it's mutants have been experimented on. I don't know. And they have a grudge against Magneto, and they now serve Sinister, and they all are conspiring on kidnapping the X-Men and taking them out ultimately. And Mr. Sinister is like super obsessed. You forget how super obsessed he is with the Summers family bloodline, because uh it's never fully like explained here, but it's like, you know, you got to get Scott and Jean together because, you know, they're awesome powers. You gotta see, like, you know, what can we make from this, because he's like one of those kind of like those classic mad scientist archetypes. It's like Snively Whiplash meets Dr. Savannah. But anyway, since Morph under control of Sinister is like manipulating everything behind the scenes. Oh, Wolverine. Uh Wolverine is in the danger room while the wedding is going on, not uh among the ceremony, because he's in the danger room attacking all these robots in the disguise of Cyclops, just getting his frustrations out because he's really in his feelings because he wants to be with Jean, even though it's kind of like, you know, dude, it was never gonna work out, and you bought her because you can't have what you want. But kudos to him, you know, just at the very least, you know, if he has to vent his frustrations, you know, do it, you know, on inanimate objects safely. But pretty soon, like, you know, this, you know, we get Grandin Creed, who we later learn that he is the son of Victor Creed Sabretooth. I can't only imagine the kind of upbringing he must have had with that kind of guy as his father, because if you learn anything from Sabretooth's upbringing, that he was beaten, treated like an animal by family and other people, so he grew like a very savage animal and just embraced it. And he, you know, passed that kind of brutality on to his son, and therefore his son grew up hating mutants with such a fervor and passion, even beyond those of Senator Kelly, who here at this point has a complete 180 on his stance on mutants, even to the point of pardoning Hank McCoy. Now he's among the cast of the X-Men, and kudos to this, you know, series, because I think all X-Men series, now I'm thinking about it, that unlike the movies, they, well, of course, they have the benefit of being a TV show. They know when they can focus on what particular character for a particular arc. That's like we can focus on Gambit here, and then Rogue on another one, and then two-parter with Scott and Jean, and then another two-parter with like Magneto and Professor X, and everybody else is, you know, can be relegated to supporting cast. And that's what somewhat they should have done with the entire X-Men franchise up until the point of Disney acquiring them. That, you know, sometimes, you know, if you're introducing new characters, like you got Hank McCoy Beast one time, like make the story to focus about him, and like, you know, one with Jubilee, one with Storm, because like, just because like Hugh Jackman was so popular and Wolverine so popular, you put so much energy into a Wolverine, like 4 Wolverine films, and even among the X-Men team films, he's usually the center of the attention. If not him, Magneto and Professor Xavier, or Jean Grey to a certain extent, but that's about it. So once they figured out that, you know, oh yeah, the Grandin Creed thing, he leads this Friends Against Humanity, you know, organization that's just, you know, mutant hating uh uh hate group. And uh so they're trying to incite violence and try to get the means to attack against them so they can use that against to get more people on their side, because right now they're like a fringe group. But trying, because Jean Grey is supposed to be like the heart of and soul of the X-Men, the mother hen essentially, and like she's trying to make sure her and Storm's like trying to make sure like let the other X-Men know, like, look, we cannot retaliate, or we cannot do this or that, because that's only going to incite more problems. But it's like it's not that dissimilar to like those Nazi hate groups. Sure, you don't want to like feed into the BS, but at a certain point, like Wolverine points out, it's like, okay, we'll have it your way, but you gotta do something about these guys at some point or another, because they can't just continue on spouting that hate. So Cyclops and Jean gets captured by Sinister while they're on their honeymoon. uh uh Gambit gets tricked into thinking like Rogue wants a kiss, and he ends up kissing her while she's asleep, thinking it's her, but earlier was Morph in disguise. So Gambit is out of commission. So Gambit, Storm out of commission, Scott and Jean are gone. So it's like little by little, it's like they're 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 being taken out of commission. It's very systematically. And Morph slipped up when he tried to pretend to be Professor Xavier, and Wolverine immediately sniffed him out, because like it's weird, because like, well, I was about to say like a psychic, but Jean is not there, because Jean and Xavier is only two psychics on this cast. So with someone like those two and Wolverine's heightened senses, they can easily sniff out an imposter, which they did, and they come to realize, okay, now something's up. So they end up tracking down Scott and Jean, and somewhat getting through to Morph, who thought he was left behind, but now he's conflicted. And he for a moment he helped fight off Sinister, but next episode Wolverine is doing what he can to try to track Morph down and bring him back home, because as he puts, like, he's my friend, he's the only one who can actually make me laugh. I guess that being like a hard thing to do for Wolverine. But he eventually realized that Morph needs his time to come to grips with what's going on, and he'll come back on his own time. Oh, here we also like have like a brief moment with like a Storm story. This one episode where she's she and Rogue are heading off to Africa to fight off the Shadow King, who's possessing Storm's son. In this iteration, Storm has like a son named Umjari, I think it's Umjari, and he has immune ability of super speed. Not like to the point of like the Flash, not even Quicksilver. He's just fast enough. But like I said, it's like the only iteration that Storm actually has a child. And there's other tales of Storm having like a child with like T'Challa, because these two were married at one point. But a Shadow King was trapped in like a astral plane situation thanks to Professor Xavier. But since he's gone, there's no way he can just be resealed. So they have to trick him going back into the same place he left from, which they did. It was a nice little Storm story, and you learn that, you know, she actually had like a family. Oh, and then we got a Return of Colossus, and the episode called Red Dawn, where some corrupt generals in Russia decides to release Omega Red from his icy prison, because I guess after the fall of the Soviet Union, it's like, okay, we need to reclaim our land and everything like that. So they turned loose a complete monster that was put on ice for a reason. And now that he's like, you know, tearing ass all through Russian villages and, you know, trying to usurp control over the government under his iron-fisted rule, Colossus goes to America and try to get help from the X-Men, but only Jubilee's there, so she leaves a note and goes off with Colossus. You know, a few hours later, Wolverine finds it, and then, you know, because he lived such a long life, he ran into Omega Red a long time ago, and how formidable he was. And that's part of the reason why he was put on ice, because they managed to, you know, stop him. But it wasn't until like a few hours from there, the other X-Men, you know, showed up and lent a hand. So they all try to take down, Omega Red, who at this point, only one Russian general, Dark Star, who also is a mutant, could not stand the fact that her people are being hurt by this monster because of her other corrupt leaders. So she's like, okay, we cannot have this guy, you know, wreaking havoc. We got to put a stop to this, otherwise he'll never stop. So they realize, okay, we got to use you know, bitter cold in order to stop him, because in his armor like skin is durable enough to avoid real deep slashes from adamantium claws from Wolverine. So, and he drains like energy from people using his whip coils. And it's like, we need to do a lot more with Omega Red, because he actually, you know, comes across like a very, very formidable foe, not only to the X-Men, but Wolverine more specifically. So the X-Men with Colossus and Darkstar all team up to, like, you know, hold him down, just so Storm's cold winter blast can finally, you know, get him back to and get him trapped, so they can put him, you know, permanently on ice. And Colossus gets invited to join the X-Men, but he needs to stay behind to rebuild. But, you know, he says he's gonna come back. Don't worry. What else? Trying to remember everything. There was, because, oh man, that honestly was my favorite episode, because just to see like other members of the X-Men that isn't part of like the main cast, because yet there will be like a episode with Nightcrawler in the later seasons. But it's just a shame that, okay, why don't we get like the main roster of X-Men, you know, Colossus and Nightcrawler, then there's gonna be a thing with Iceman. It's like, okay, we want to get these guys, once we see them, maybe not join right away, but, you know, next time we see them, they're part of the main cast. Because, you know, the benefit of this show is the fact that, you know, there's moments where like there, you know, there's a few members have to be taken out of commission, whether it's for story purposes or they're just not there, and it's like, you know, the primary focus is on this particular person or persons, and everybody else seems the support. Like uh like, obviously not everybody need to be there in Africa with Storm and Rogue. It was a it was a big enough threat just to require just two of the members. Of course, the others can arguably be there, but not it's not like a prerequisite with every episode, because mostly probably because of the animation and budget and everything like that. So they managed to work around that narratively and say, like, okay, this is only requires like at least 4 of the members. Jubilee doesn't need to be a part of this particular episode, and so on and so forth. We get like a moment where we get a back, some more backstory with Wolverine working in, because he's Canadian. He was part of the Alpha Flight, who's like a Canadian version of, think of them the Canadian version of the Avengers. And Wolverine was a part of that for a while, and not too long after the Weapon X program. And he befriended this woman named Heather and her husband, Vindicator, who's the leader of the Alpha Flight. And the Canadian general issued a order to have the Alpha Flight team capture Wolverine so they can extract and study the adamantium metal so they can use it for their purposes. But of course, he ended up telling the team like a complete lie. Don't know about Vindicator. He might knew what they was really after, but he's like a good soldier. He follows orders. Even though Heather chastised him for not thinking for himself and knowing how wrong this is, because they were brutally torturing him just to try to get the information. When it wasn't for Heather like standing up for his sake, he's like, no, this is wrong. You do it if you want somebody to do your dirty work. But the other Alpha Flight team just was told, like, oh, we'll do whatever we can to just get Wolverine back on their team. Like, why do you all care? Just because, yeah, sure, he was part of the team you consider a friend, but it's like he moved on. And you seem like some lovesick, kid that's like can't let go of an ex that dumped him. It's very, very needy. Like, what's the purpose? It's like the Avengers, losing their mind and having like a grudge against Black Widow because she decides she doesn't want to be part of the Avengers no more. It's like, let them live their lives. So Wolverine eventually, after taking down a bunch of robots sent by the general, he was about to attack Vindicator until Heather stopped him, and he tells everybody, if y'all come after me one more time, I will not show mercy again. So he runs off. Then we get which leads into my Gambit comic book review that I'll be doing a little bit later, where Remy gets called back to New Orleans because his brother is in trouble by his ex-fiancee Belladonna. And of course, back in the day, we never had like a concrete understanding of Gambit's origin story. And that was another thing with like the Morlocks and his role in capturing and later mistreatment by Mr. Sinister, who hired Gambit at that time, who I don't believe was a part of the X-Men yet. Yeah, definitely wasn't part of the X-Men yet. So, there was like a whole thing. It was only read like a couple of comics here and there that touched on this. We never got a full spectrum on it. But of course, I remember on the tail end of the situation where it was like Gambit's own kind of trial situation, and I think Archangel was representing him, and come to realize, his role in the mistreatment of the Morlocks by Mr. Sinister, and he was just pretty much like kind of exiled out of the X-Men, essentially. Most of them really wanted to really hurt Gambit, but thanks to Rose, like, no, we don't need to do that. So they just dropped him off in the middle of nowhere, and it's like, just don't come back. But of course, that's long since been dealt with and hashed out and whatever. But here you learn about the Thieves Guild and the Assassins Guild. Gambit grew up in the Thieves Guild, and Belladonna grew up in the Assassins Guild, who she later is the leader of. And they've been going on this long-standing feud between these two, like Hackfield's and McCoy's. And Gambit and Belladonna are kind of like the whole West Side Story, Romeo Juliet type of situation. And marriage between them would have brokered peace between the two clans, but Belladonna's brother wouldn't have it, and right now is like a shaky peace. But there's this external, pretty much like a mutant with long life. They have to give their ties to, in order to dishonor this kind of situation they got set up. And the external bestows, well, at least in the comics, bestows the thieves with long life, not necessarily immortality per se. They can still be killed by traditional means, but they just cannot grow old and die in their natural state. And the assassins gains power. Here in the show, they just the Tithe or the external decides to give the sacred power to whoever managed to appease her more with the tithe, or get there first, or just one of them shows up empty-handed for whatever reason. So it's the assassins who normally get like this sacred power. Gambit eventually shows up to back to New Orleans, and breaks into the Thieves Guild mansion, and speaks with Belladonna, who shows him the room where his brother's staying at. And it's just like a trade-off, like, I'm here, let my brother go. She lets him go, but not without first making sure she switched out the tithe box that he's running off with, knowing full well that it will not be pleasing to the external. So the ring that Belladonna gave Remy, turns out to be some kind of kind of like a leash in a way, with like an energy that kind of shocks him into submission. It is connected to her powers in some kind of way. Because she actually does love him, but she just want to make sure he stays and not run off again. And I like, Rogue's moment in this, because she's in love with Remy too, and she's just calling Belladonna Swamp Witch. It's kind of funny. Y'all both Southern, just different part of the Southern borders. So a fight ensues, and the external thinking like, oh, the thieves have shirked their duties and part of this tithe. But thanks to Jean Grey getting inside her head and showing her that, oh, the Assassins Guild has been like playing everybody behind the scenes. I was like, they're assassins. Will you expect them? How honorable do you expect them to be? But we'll get more into that when we cover like the Gambit comic, his first limited issue, limited series. So she realized that, oh, like the assassins been, betraying, the rules. So she was about to kill off all the Assassins Guild for their betrayal, but Gambit stepped in and it's like, no, don't take her life, just take her powers. So she decided, okay, fine, like I'll honor your request, these who have been honoring the sacred tithe all along. So we'll just take your powers away, and I'll see you guys the next annual tithe collecting. Because I think this is kind of like an annual thing, I believe. And Belladonna, tears in her eyes, is like, well, like, don't go, Remy. It's like, I gotta go. I don't want to be a part of this whole feud thing anymore. Like, I'm an X-Men now. And the X-Men go off. Which is honestly one of my... Honestly, I like this episode too. Because I always love... Because Gambit's like, honestly, one of the coolest Marvel characters. It's like, man... Like, you forget how cool he is, and his power is freaking insane. Once we cover the comic, we'll get into his like power set, but man, it's pretty dope. So we get a return of Cable and Bishop here with like a two-parter, and it's very Terminator, honestly, where Bishop in part one goes back in time to try to stop was he trying to stop apocalypse. It was like a plague that started that killed off the X-Men, that shouldn't have happened, and trying to figure out where this plague started and stop it. So Bishop goes back in time and regroups with the X-Men, let them know about this plague and how quickly it wipes a lot of at first they started attacking mutants, but then it evolved and then started attacking everybody. So they eventually track it down to this facility that is being funded by Granted Creed, who is working on this, this dude who thought it was like an assistant or just a lab rat, but turns out to be Apocalypse in disguise, who's organizing this plague that he's going to be sending out to take out a lot of people. Hank McCoy is on trial from like a situation that Granted Creed kind of set him up to take a fall on, and he had like an aerosol canister filled with this plague and is about to infect Beast, but thanks for Bishop spotted that weapon, he attacks Creed and Creed ends up infecting himself. Of course, the X-Men really don't trust Bishop, given the fact that he is right from being, he is from the future, but it's like, they still won't believe it or give him the benefit of the doubt. But his methods are just so rash that you need to like take a beat for a minute. But eventually, they trace Granted Creed back to this facility where they just discover Apocalypse and blow up the facility. But as they're escaping, Apocalypse grows in size and just annihilates all the X-Men. Technically, they were white. They were killed. Now, if you're following like the whole situation with like MCU multiverses, Loki, type of line of thinking, this part two is a what Cable's doing is like a variant timeline. The X-Men that we've been following up to this point is by all rights is dead, and we're following like a new setup, X-Men moving forward, if you're thinking of it that way. So Cable discovers in his own, I think he's further along in the future than, or a different set timeline of a future. The timelines can, time can get pretty crazy. But let's put it in this way. Bishop comes from an alternate timeline from where Cable comes from. Cable appears to be coming from maybe like an Age of Apocalypse timeline, while Bishop comes from a timeline where Sentinels, are pretty much taking over. So while Cable and his team are fighting off Apocalypse and his forces, ironically, the robot forces that are working under Apocalypse looks very similar to the T-800 Terminators. Because like I said, they obviously had Terminator in their mind, because T2 would have came out in the same year this TV show was airing, or at least about to air, or sometime after the movie aired. So because of what Bishop did, it's starting to affect Cable's timeline, where time is trying to rewrite itself to fit the normal time stream now, the new time stream now. So Cable's son Tyler, because this is the only iteration where Cable actually had like a son, where in other iterations, or at least mainly in the comics, he doesn't have a kid outside of Hope Summers, who's like an adopted kid. And of course, the Deadpool 2, he has a kid there, but we never see them. Anyway, Cable figures out, thanks to his time box lady, who's pretty much like Siri, telling him when to go and who's responsible. So he traveled at the same time in the same location as Bishop does, just a few seconds afterwards, and start attacking Bishop, trying to keep him from doing what he's about to do. And these two in the comics, I remember, always butting heads, because each one has their own little timeline that they believe is the right one, and they got their own little missions. They're like hard ass, hard boiled, rough male dudes that grew up in a very harsh environment that requires them to just have like a hard exterior. So thanks to Bishop's ability to absorb and redirect energy, he managed to tank Cable's gun blast and fires it right back at him. And so Cable, after the events from what happened in part 1 transpires again in part 2, Cable then realized, after he's getting a brief rundown about the members of the X-Men by his time box, he comes down to Wolverine and realizes what he has to do, because he hates the idea, but according to his time box, he realized, okay, in order to maintain his timeline, he has to help Apocalypse commit widespread genocide, and he's not comfortable with that. So he comes to realize, oh, he has immune ability of super healing. So once they carry on into this facility, find out about Creed and Apocalypse, Cable had the idea of tossing Wolverine into those vats where they house that the virus, and have it attack Wolverine. But he tells everybody, calm down everybody, allow it to do its job, because Wolverine's healing factor is working in overdrive, and in that process is producing antibodies that will be later used to cure any potential plague that Apocalypse will try to meek out, so preventing Apocalypse from still continuing on with his plans. And this time none of the X-Men died. And so Bishop returns back to his own timeline. The plague never exists, but he still had like a desolate future with the Sentinels. But Cable goes back to his time. Tyler is alive, and everything's back as it should be. So I thought that was a really good story with Cable and Bishop. I haven't really read much with Cable. Well, I've read a little bit stuff with Cable here and there, but I'm not like an avid reader of Cable. I never read like a Bishop book, which, going through all these X-Men reviews, I will be covering a Bishop story and a Cable story. We get to learn more with how Rogue got her powers, and we'll be also covering that in my next week, or at least maybe later this week or leading into next week, when I cover a Rogue solo stuff, which picks up after Gambit's mini series, where she's essentially adopted by Mystique after her father threw her out when he found out she was a mutant, and she essentially was like under, I won't say under the thumb of Mystique. She actually legit loved Rogue, but was at the same time still using her to commit all these crimes, along with Pyro and Avalanche. And there was causing this heist in this airfield, and they run into Warbird, aka Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers. And at that time, I didn't know who that person was. Didn't know I thought she was probably some generic superhero. Didn't know the significance of this character, nor at the time I think hardly anybody cared about Captain Marvel Warbird, not until a year or two, or at least when it was first announced, when they was going to make a Captain Marvel movie. When that was announced, even before Brie Larson was even cast, it wasn't until around that time when Marvel started putting more energy into Carol Danvers. Of course, she showed up here and there. So did Monica Rambeau here and there. I think the only time I actually read anything with Monica Rambeau was during the Secret Wars story event, with that classic 70s hair fro. Of course, there's like some Monica Rambeau comics that's going on currently right now. I'm not like a fan of Monica Rambeau like that. I appreciate her, as a character and everything like that, but it's just like, sometimes it's gonna be certain characters that you're not gonna probably be into. Maybe at some point when somebody else reviews it, might end up changing my mind, and I'll probably check it out. As a matter of fact, when this little series with Monica Rambeau completes, maybe then as I'll go read it from start to finish in one binge read, and then come back to you guys and do a review later on in the future. I'm pretty sure it'll probably be wrapped up around the time the Marvels movie is released. So this explains how Rogue got the ability to flight, near invulnerability, and super strength. Is when she was instructed by Mystique to grab hold of Captain Marvel, and of course Rogue should not hold on to a person too long, because like her first boyfriend, when her powers manifested, she kissed him, and it was going on too long, and it ends up putting him in a coma. The exact same thing happened to Ms. Marvel, but if she held on even longer than that, she can actually kill somebody. by absorbing so much of their life forces, it completely drains them and kills them. When it comes to a power person, she can actually retain a few, if not all, has never been like shown otherwise. She can actually retain certain things that she take, like Miss Marvel's not her energy blast, but her strength, flight, and her near invulnerability. So now part of Miss Marvel's or Miss Marvel, Captain Marvel's consciousness is in Rogue's head, is pretty much haunting her, and Mystique is kind of exploiting that for her own purposes, just to get her to come back, because she just, I'm your mother, I want you back, please come back, kind of thing. And it was thanks to Jean who kind of got through to her after she keeps freaking out, because she still visits, as you'll go through, once I go through the Rogue comic, I'll bring it up again. Once a year, she still visits Cody. I don't know if this guy actually woke up from that coma after all these years. Matter of fact, I really want to find that out, because she, has like visited that guy's bedside at least once a year, because she's always haunted by that, thing that was like a complete accident, but she blames herself for putting an innocent person in a coma. And that's how she has like this fear of getting too close to people, because that always like mess with her. Okay, it looks like here's the lowdown on Cody. Cody Robbins was the first boy Rogue ever kissed, triggering her consciousness, stealing powers, putting him into a coma. He was eventually used in a plot to kill Rogue by Belladonna. The plot failed, but ended in Cody's death. Oh wow, that's a very sad thing. That was Rogue number. His death was in Rogue number 4, February 1995. I think that might be the slight spoilers. I think that might be the story that I'll be covering for Rogue. I didn't know. Honestly, I did not know. I probably shouldn't have just tried to look it up, but I thought it might have been like a... You never know with these comics. They could have easily have resurrected that kid long ago, or not resurrected, but he came out of the coma and he living his own life and forgave Rogue. That's what I was expecting. So that's why I probably, it was my own fault. It's not a big deal. I don't think anybody really cared about like what happened to her first boyfriend. But but because Captain Marvel, who at that time probably going through her own mess, because if you don't know, Captain Marvel is like Tony Stark, dealt with alcoholism, and I think around the 90s, early 2000s, he had like a substance abuse, like with drinking. So she has always been brash and everything like that. So part of that bit in her personality got put into Rogue's brain, and thanks to Jean Grey, with Rogue inside Rogue's subconsciousness, managed to lock up that negative part of Captain Marvel's psyche into this box, and that's where Rogue kept her. I imagine this like some kind of tie-in comic or something like that, where Rogue managed to purge that part of her brain, so that way she can, maybe the best way to purge it is actually come to grips with what she did and forgive herself because it wasn't her fault. She was led astray by somebody who's supposed to have looked out for her. So she tell Mystique to F off because you may have raised me, but you're not my mother kind of attitude. Then you get a nice little solo Beast story with Beast meeting with a woman that he starting to fall in love with named Carly, no relation, and she. If you ever watched Yu-Gi-Oh, Joey Wheeler's sister Serenity is that whole situation with like, oh, she's blind and gotta get through this surgery. Like, unlike Joey, who has to go through this freaking tournament to win the prize money, Hank McCoy can just do it himself because he's pretty doggone smart. And to help cure her eyesight. And of course he knows he's a mutant, but she's fallen in love with like the man inside. But because her father was a bigot, he doesn't want Hank anywhere near Carly. So Hank decides like, okay, I don't want to cause any further distress with her. So I'll just, have my assistant to, do the procedure for me, and I'll see her soon after. But then because of Brandon Creed, he orders his Friends Against Humanity to kidnap Carly after he finds out that she's sweet on him. Kidnaps her, and then this is the first time we actually see like Hank McCoy really like lose his temper, because he's always been a very calm and collected kind of person, very reserved, and it's like kind of dignified. But this is like somebody that touched his heart, that even he's still human at the end of the day, and he's just as effective being hurt through the heart, same as anybody else. So he goes and tracks down Carly, while Wolverine at the same time, because he's trying to infiltrate this place so he can probably hopefully bring this place down on the inside out. Come to discover Carly, and after getting a closer look at Brandon Creed, realizing, oh, this is Sabretooth's kid. So now I know how to get to this guy. So while he's infiltrating this place, pretending to be a human, he asks Jubilee and the gang to bring this projector thing, and it projects a hologram of Sabretooth with all his stats to be verbally announced via speaker, where all the other Friends Against Humanity can hear, where it's like, oh, this is Victor Creed, father of Brandon Creed, blah blah blah. And then everybody's looking at Brandon Creed, and he just freaks out, and it goes to show like the level of just hate that can affect some people, where it's like people can just can't even say nothing to this guy. He's like just shaking, everybody just shaking their head like this is like a sad dude, because he went through so much trauma of being raised by this kind of monster. So he gets like even going so far beyond just a bigot here at this point, where he just hates his own lineage, and even the thought of being connected to this guy, it just, and everybody knowing, and he grabbing a gun, he's shooting at the hologram. You are not my father. You are not my father. You are not my father. Yes. Kudos to the voice actor of Brandon Creed in this particular moment, because when you hear this, I wouldn't say you feel for the guy, but it's just like you feel this level of some level of pain this guy must have been going through in his entire life to lead him to this point where he just like wigs out like that. Just even the sight of this man, it's just like he just has like a complete mental breakdown, and it's just like, it's just, So this is pretty much like, I won't say nipped in the bud with these like hate groups, but at least for right now, we have to deal with Grant and Creed and his trickery. Uh, then you have this little short little episode with like Mojo, which is another X-Men rogue that we really don't see all that much of. I think there was a thing with Jubilee and a couple of like Jubilee, Laura, X-23, Dazzler, and another female X-Men. I think it was maybe last year. I haven't read. I didn't really get into it, but I think Day was dealing with Mojo, but it wasn't like a big event. They don't treat Mojo like a huge event, like they would with like Magneto or something like that. Even though they could easily do something with him, given all the streaming platforms and consuming of TV and franchising and something like the MCU with like this massive franchise. You can easily do something like that with Mojo and make it this huge event where it brings and have him like maybe team up with Arcade and like bring in like the entire Marvel universe involved into his Warp television movie franchise, and kind of like a Warp version of what we have in the MCU. That would be pretty fun. Then it books end with them finally realizing where Xavier is. He's in the Savage Lands with Magneto, and they are captured by Sinister. They end up teaming up with Kazar, pretty much Marvel's Tarzan, and even though none of their powers work, they've managed to be a little bit more, well, at least Wolverine still can be resourceful without his. Luckily, he's always been trained in survival, and he doesn't necessarily need his powers in order to do that. So, because Kaiser has like a grudge against Magneto because he built the citadel that later Mr. Sinister took over and created these monsters that enslaved his people. So, Kazar teams up with Wolverine to infiltrate this place. Kazar goes to release his people while Wolverine releases his friends. And after they smash the machine that's canceling out their powers, because a lot of people probably was always under the assumption that the Savage Lands, something about this particular place neutralizes superpowers, but that's not the case. So they attack Mr. Sinister and his crew of flunkies. And there's one dude with like a big bulbous head and a child, I want to say child body, but it's what do they call this dude? It's like I forgot his doggone name, but uh something to do with kid, like kid brain or something like that. I'm butchering it, but they also see Sauron for the first time, and Sauron is a very deadly X-Men villain that usually pops up if you're in the Savage Lands, and he has the ability to take control of people's minds and himself. A little bit more. Oh, I'm not spelling this right. His real name is Carl Likos. He's an Argentinian hypnotherapist. Became a human pterodactyl hybrid and will be conqueror of the Savage Lands. And life force absorption. In the human form, Carl is fairly typical, except he keeps his ability to absorb the life forces of others living beings to sustain himself. This often triggers his transformation into a pterodactyl form. He has used a device on occasion to absorb energy, but in lieu of a device like it, skin-to-skin contact is required. Mutant power absorption. If he absorbs the life force of a mutant, he will absorb a portion of their powers and temporarily. Energy blast, superhuman strength, flight, fire breath, hypnosis, telekinesis. Of course, they don't really battle Sauron like that. He shows up, he does his own little thing behind the scenes, but he'll probably be a prominent adversary in later seasons. But thanks to the combined efforts of Magneto and the X-Men and Kazar and his people, they managed to overthrow and supposedly kills Mr. Sinister, but of course he manages to slink away. So now the entirety of the X-Men are together at last, without one being trapped somewhere else for the bulk of the season. And it's kind of crazy that they're gone for that long and surviving on whatever means that they have to survive on the Savage Lands. And they never bump into Kazar the whole entire time. That is weird. But anyway, that's season 2. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I mean, like I said, like the episode with Gambit, the episode with Rogue, and the episode with Colossus are my favorite episodes in the entire season 2. They were really, really, really fun. But which ones of the episodes that were your favorite? Because, like I said, like brilliantly done to make a few of these episodes like into like 2-part arcs. Because I think that's like with the Clone Wars series, it's the best way of doing it when it comes to these type of shows. Sometimes you can go with episodic, but Batman the Animated Series, or other times you can, if it's written well and you got enough story to tell. But at the very least, you should make these seasons arcs. There's a 2-part arc here. Like you got like 10 episodes in a particular season. 2 of them could be a 2-part arc, then another 2-part arc, one single episode about a thing that you can tell in one go, and then go back to another 2-part arc, and then another single episode. This is a way to go. It's brilliantly handled, and it's a proper way to tell a story, especially when it comes to an ensemble cast. You give everybody enough time, screen time, to fully invest into these characters. It's brilliantly handled. The art. Oh, don't want to forget about the art. The art drastically improves here, and once we get into season 3, 4, and then 5, I imagine the art, I'm pretty sure, last I remember, it stayed consistent, but you might see some slight improvements. But let me know what you thought of season 2. I'll start getting to work on season 3 and do a review as soon as possible on that. But I want to get ready for my review for the review on the Beast comic and the Gambit comic, which they're fairly short, so they won't take all that long. Then later on tonight, I will get into more Jedi Survivor. But anyway, like and subscribe to the links in the description below. Subscribe to my Patreon. I'll be on Twitch live with more Jedi Survivor and other content down the line. I'll see you soon. Take care.